Sally, thanks very much, and a warm welcome to everybody. In fact, it's not as warm as last Tuesday, but equally it is nice and sunny where I am out in Gloucestershire. First of all, can I just say this is the last in our series of happy hours for this spring and summer, and it's great to finish off with fabulous presentations and something that, Ed, I think this is an inspired title, by the way. I do like designing inclusively, why inclusive and accessible design should be the first fix. And we're going to look at issues around inclusivity and accessibility, as well as really highlighting some really important work which is being launched this afternoon by Laurie, which is around looking at interior design. And for somebody who's worked within HAPPI and the design of good quality housing, you know, we often think about the fabric, we often think about the architecture, we've got design in terms of the external, but the interiors are equally important, and we look forward to going through that in due course. So I'm going to hand over shortly to Ed Warner, founder and CEO of Motionspot. He's going to sort of introduce some of the issues around inclusivity, what Motionspot are doing and leading the way in this sector. We're going to hand over to Laurie Pinkerton-Rowley, who's going to director at Park Grove and one of the authors of the author of the interior design fact sheet and looking at different considerations. And we're really going to follow up with that with a really open conversation. I wish it was open air, but an open conversation discussion. And please do post any questions you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we look forward to picking up those later on during this session. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Ed and welcome you to this happy hour.
Jeremy, thank you very much, and again thanks to all attendees for joining us for this session. I'm Ed Warner. I'm delighted to be sharing the session today with Laurie. I've known Laurie for a number of years. We're working on a really exciting project together for Augustinian Care in St George's Park, which really is going to be a groundbreaking example of as to how to design really accessible and inclusive later living and assisted living apartments down in Sussex. So more on that to follow. As Jeremy mentioned, the idea of today is to really have an open discussion around what's possible when designing inclusive and accessible spaces. And Laurie's going to be following up in her session with the really important details from an interior design perspective that so often get missed as part of the design process. And that's why together we wanted to really promote the thinking that accessible and inclusive design should be the first fix. It shouldn't be the last fix. You know, if we can embed these principles from the outset of a design project, it can save huge amounts of costs in expensive retrofits at a later stage. So the idea is Laura and I will present for sort of 10-15 minutes each, just around some of the issues in this area, but also what's possible, giving some design inspiration. And then we'll be having a conversation together just on what we're seeing across the industry, how we're addressing different challenges in each of our areas of the business. But it's also an opportunity for you to be asking questions of us. So as Jeremy and Sally mentioned, please do put all of your questions in the Q&A function. And as the conversation moves on, I'll be able to draw on those questions from there. I'm just going to share my screen a second. Hopefully that's all coming up. Just to give you a brief introduction to why I'm so passionate about this industry. I set the accessible design business Motionspot up 10 years ago now, after the personal experience of our co-founder and old school friend of mine, James Taylor, who was paralysed in a diving accident aged 25. He returned to his flat in Battersea to a home that looked very similar to this, full of all the design choices, materials, styles that are readily available to all of us. But this was what was presented to him as a wheelchair user. And it was what he installed in his home in Battersea. And I happened to have dinner with him in 2011. And he said to me at the time, every morning I wake up and I'm reminded of my condition because the product's around me. And I'm a big believer that if you get the environment right for people, you can really positively impact cognitive and physical health. So that was where Motionspot started, and over the last 10 years, we've built a really talented team of access designers, occupational therapists, and product specialists who are all experts in everything to do with accessibility and inclusive design. But importantly, we're designers at heart, like Laurie, and we don't want anything leaving our design studio without us wanting the product or service in our own homes or lives. And really central to sort of our beliefs as a business, and we'll sort of come on to talk about this later on, I think, around the importance of user feedback, is this concept of evidence-based design. We really passionately believe that in order for you to deliver a project that is going to truly work for the people that you're building it for, you need a blend of global best practice and academic research blended with a designer's own knowledge and experience of what works in the space. But really importantly, we need to talk about the people who are using these buildings and enjoying these buildings, and what are the existing challenges they're finding in current buildings, and how can that be designed out as part of the design process. As I said before, we ideally try and get involved at the earliest stage of the design process. We're not the architect, we're not the interior designer. Laurie's the interior designer. We fit into this really interesting bracket around accessible design guardian is the way of looking at us, or even inclusive design guardian. We're there to sort of challenge the thinking at each stage of the design and build part of the process, to ensure that the right plans are being put in place, that whether that be at REBA stage 2 or 3, the circulation space is correct. Where we really get involved is around the development of accessible products and ensuring that the spaces don't have to look clinical, and seeing that through right the way through to construction, as inevitably contractors pull things out in the value engineering process. I'm going to pick out some examples quite quickly, particularly in housing with care, because that's so relevant for the audience we have today, but also looking at some of the principles that are going on in hospitality, because hospitality are doing some really interesting things when it comes to accessible design that we can learn a lot from in our industries. And what I'd say is why our business is needed, and why there is still a slight challenge from an industry perspective, is if we design housing for later living around Part M and BS 8300, effectively the minimum standards of building regulation and also best practice being British standard, we won't design homes to suit the needs of everybody. In reality, only 8% of disabled people are wheelchair users. Predominantly the guidance, in particular Part M, focuses very much on design for physical disability. And what we do is work with clients to get them thinking about how they can design for the 8% of wheelchair users, but also the 92% of people who may have another physical, sensory, cognitive need, including neurodiversity. We always love these set of icons on the right-hand side created by Microsoft, and I'm sure some of you have seen these before, but it effectively says that at any given time in each of our days, weeks, or lives, each one of us will experience either a situational, temporary, or permanent disability. And for us, inclusive design isn't about designing an accessible space and a non-accessible space. This just should be embedded into everything we're doing. And the reason this is so important today is because the problem has always been there, but it's been massively accelerated by the COVID pandemic, and having vulnerable people living in their homes, often in homes that are totally unsuitable to meet their needs in later life. We know that £2.3 billion is spent every year by the NHS on fools. And hopefully what you'll see and hear from Laurie and me today will help to reduce some of those health and social care costs. This is all about either keeping people in their own homes safer, or keeping them in environments that really kind of positively impact health and well-being. I'm just going to fly through some of the sort of common challenges we see a lot on later living schemes, and just pick out examples in bathroom, kitchen and bedroom, and then come on to what can be designed around it. This is a very common bathroom seen in later living schemes. Common challenges here are around the type of flush plate used. So many flush plates are really difficult to depress for someone with limited dexterity or arthritis in the fingers. Yes, there is storage underneath the basin, but actually if you're in a wheelchair, if you're in a wheelchair, you can't actually access underneath that basin. The clearance isn't significant enough for a wheelchair user to get underneath. Storage should always be considered, ideally not being open. Disabled people tend to have lots of items, particularly close to the toilet, that they don't want to see on show. So how can you design storage in the right way? How can you get the mirror height right, so someone who's standing and in a seated position can easily see themselves? How can you make sure that for someone with vision loss, the shower screen is frosted so that they're able to define where that screen is in the room? And when thinking about kitchens, think about the height and location of storage space. So many focus groups we run, you see so many kitchen cupboards that are just unused because people can't reach them. Also thinking about ease of storage. The picture on the bottom right shows someone storing a load of everyday items that are easy in reach on the hob. Of course, that creates a massive, fire hazard and risk to everyone in that building by having those items there. So thinking about storage, and Laurie will come on to talk about colour contrast in a bit, is really important. And again, it's the small detail, like what pile of carpet are you using? How easy is it for someone to travel over that carpet in a wheelchair or a rollator or a frame? How easy are those windows to open for someone with limited dexterity? And Laurie will come on to talk about the principles of lighting in a minute. Just sort of flying through what is possible, an example of a future-proofed and wheelchair accessible bathroom. This was actually put into a residential project in West London a few years ago. Principles like slip-resistant floor tiling instead of the slightly more hospital-looking ultramarine vinyls. Dual design features like the riser rail, which holds the shower head in place, supporting up to 150 kilograms of weight. A really accessible flush plate that's operated with palm or elbow. Getting the height of the toilet right. I think we should probably come on to talk about heights of toilets. They're often discussed and debated on later living schemes. But wherever possible, we want to try and design out the shower curtain, and we put it in here what looks like a fixed pane of glass, but actually bifolds back to the wall when not in use, fully opening up circulation space in that room. The concept of adaptability and flexibility is something that we always try and introduce on later living projects, particularly as someone may have an access requirement for a period of time, but may not in the future. They may be in a wheelchair commode, or they may have a hip replacement that only requires support for a number of weeks. This is a system of removable grab rails that in 5 minutes you can hook on grab rails and shower seats onto these cover plates you see on the wall. Again, this is a hospitality project, but we've started to introduce this on a number of later living schemes, including the project that we're doing together down with Augustinian Care. And it just gives operators that flexibility to adapt spaces as and when they need to. I'm sure all of your schemes will have a communal wheelchair accessible toilet. I'm sure most of them will look like this. They tend to be the most unloved spaces on the development. This is a dock end pack that is dragged and dropped from plan to plan by architects. This is what can be achieved in exactly the same space using a different set of styles and finishes and materials. We're not suggesting a glossy wall tile is right for later living. This went into a private members club, but we wanted to show that before and after and demonstrate what's possible if you get accessible design right at the outset. Just 3 more slides from me. I wanted to cover just some principles around kitchen design. Laurie will pick this out in the guidance she's going to be presenting in a minute. But some of the principles here around kitchen design is making sure your overhead units are slightly lowered so that someone can access those units who may be short in stature. Can you put in some drop-down baskets to make the contents of those cabinets more accessible? How can we turn the extractor fan on when the hob comes on? Really small point, but asking an older person to do that movement time and time again is often very difficult for someone with arthritis in the shoulder. There are products on the market that are becoming more affordable that just make the whole experience in the kitchen easier. Handles, not handleless kitchens. Drawers, not cupboards. How can you have contents coming out towards someone rather than asking them to reach in? And also thinking about the access of the oven. This is a NEF oven, hide and slide a model, which for many local authority housing providers is out of budget. but the principles of that oven can still be replicated across other models. So my point is that if you get the principles right, you don't need to get the most expensive product on the market. It's about being conscious of what you need to be designing to, and then sourcing product accordingly. Just my last point on product is around technology. So, you know, when thinking about accessible homes, technology has a really important part to play in this. And I know Jeremy has been doing a lot of work as part of his HAPPI program around how technology can improve health and well-being in later living. We're seeing huge amounts of innovation in this space at the moment. We're working on a fascinating project with a later living scheme to effectively put sensors into homes to monitor health and well-being of residents. Not just monitor health and well-being, but sleep patterns and temperature and nighttime wandering, and be able to sound alarm if there is a problem. These dot plots are really interesting. I won't go into too much detail, but effectively for each resident there is a dot plot. And this line shows when they go to bed, this line shows when they get up in the morning, and this shows activity in the night. So this resident is exactly what we want to see in later years. This is a very routine pattern, versus this one, hopefully you can see my cursor, second to bottom right, is completely the reverse. So, you know, that's suggesting someone is up a lot throughout the night and actually would really benefit from care intervention, which is actually these 4 lines showing a carer has been in each hour, or it's every 3-hour period throughout the night. So it just shows how technology is changing from an analog to digital. Make sure that if you are putting technology into your later living developments, that it can talk to other technology and not be standalone in its nature. I'm going to finish there and hand over to Laurie, and then open up for questions.
Thank you. Let me pull up my document right now.
While Laurie's doing that, I'll just add, Ed, thanks very much for a great presentation. I had the privilege of joining you at the Brooklyn Hotel in Manchester last month. It was a real eye-opener to that retail the hospitality sector that you mentioned, but also I think I mentioned to you the following morning I met somebody with profound disabilities who's nearly in tears, saying it was the best place he'd ever stayed in his 35 years of life. You know, he really had not had a chance to experience somewhere so inclusively designed to cater for his very profound needs. So well done, you and the team.
Can you see my screen, or have I not been successful?
Not yet. It may just be taking a little bit of time.
Okay, let me try this a different way. Nope.
Would you like me to share your slides on your behalf?
That would be great. Thank you. That way we aren't spending any time on it.
There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. So I'm director of Park Grove Design, and we've had a long held interest in accessibility and also designing for older people, to the point where many years ago, I volunteered and was on the management committee of a care home in London because I was a designer by trade, but I wanted to understand what some of the issues were. If you can go forward. Yeah, so we do care, retirement, dementia units, as well as assisted living facilities and also hospitality. So it's interesting you're mentioning about these crossovers, because we find that in our work as well. Moving forward onto our team, this is our overall team that we have. We're based in Brighton, but we work all over the country. And for some reason, we're huge in Ghana. Don't ask me why. And the next slide shows what our services are that we offer. And you can just, I don't need to read that to you. We do everything from the beginning of a project through to installing FF&E. And I'm just going to very quickly walk you through, if you've not worked with a design team before, whether it's us or anybody else, I'd like to walk you through the stages of design that you should expect from a design team, starting with the next slide, which is the brief. Where we specify, sometimes there are overlaps between, for example, architects and designers, or indeed accessibility experts. So you want to make clear at the beginning who's doing what, so that you are not paying for any of the overlap. Next, we go into research on the next slide, which is looking at either what area you're in or what you're particularly prepared to offer, and try to put that into context. Then going further, we're into concept and feasibility. And that's where we're testing layouts, number of people that need to be sitting in a dining area, for example, and perhaps some quick sketches to make sure that we're on the right track, both in terms of the number of people, the use of the space, but also the expenditure that you're making, so that it's not being either overly designed or underly designed. And next, we're looking at the layouts in greater detail, and some of the fundamental components that we'd like to see entered into a space, and run that by the client. The next slide is going to show where you're specifying floors. And just going back to what Ed was talking about in terms of levels, this is often really needs to be engaged with during the before the construction period, because if you're going to have a carpeted area and a vinyl area, for example, you don't want there to be a threshold. You want it to be flat. And so the screed will need to be set out accordingly in order for that to happen, and to get any possible trips out. The next slide goes into tender packages, which might include some joinery, for example. Possibly you wouldn't have this, but it's an example. And the next slide will show design detailing. And this is when, if you are having a service area, some sort of a bar, servery, kitchen area that will be used also by residents, it's getting down into those really nitty-gritty details of what is the sink, is there a dishwasher, is there a coffee machine, how big is it, does it actually fit in the space? Next slide. Then you get into what everybody thinks we do for a living, which is what things look like, and furniture, starting with mood boards, and then moving into, on the right-hand side, individual specifications by line item, including what kind of fabric, whether it's antimicrobial, fully washable, et cetera, needs to be in that specification, so that you know exactly what you're getting. Next slide is you may need some CGIs. The one on the left is actually a Harley Street waiting room, so not applicable, but it was not a bad CGI, so I included it. And then going on to site supervision, very often as part of the team, we will wish to go onto the site, make sure things are being put in the right way, in the right places. And then finally, we go into procurement, so getting the goods in, managing the installations. Very often people are doing sections of buildings that already exist. And so you already have people living in a space, and so this must be managed very carefully. And then finally, we go on to handing everything over down to, you know, a fake plant and some books on the shelves. So that is really what you should have from an interior design team, regardless of who they are. And now we're going to move over into what I'm going to skip this bit if you don't mind. And I would like to go to, I'm going to see if I can share now the HousingLIN document. Can you see that?
Yeah,
Yep.
I can see
Okay,
that. Yeah.
Okay, so let me swing through this. So what I'd like to point out here is, and all of these are actual images of projects, unless the image says stock photo from somebody or other. But I'd like to go through what the highlights are of the document that's being issued today. The name of it is Interior Considerations, Interior Design Impacts Quality of Life. And this gets back to what Jeremy was saying in the beginning. Very often, the interiors are kind of left to the side because everybody's really concerned about this big spend and this big building project that they're doing. If you think about it, and if you ask any interior designer, actually, the bit that people live with is this bit. And what happens invariably is the build will take up, the technology, whatever, will take up all of the budget. And then what we get is what is left over out of the budget. And that's fine, because it isn't the spend that is actually important, it's the principles. And so that's what we're going to look at right now. So the key principles are contrast, color. Now, what I mean by contrast and color, as we age, the blue cone cells in our eyes, we have the red, the green, the blue, they deteriorate faster than the green and the red. As a result, things such as shadows become difficult to necessarily negotiate. So if you see people double stepping, it's not necessarily that they're unsteady on their feet. They're not getting the signals that you and I might just take in automatically, and they don't feel safe. So where we have color contrast between walls and floors, between floors and furniture, between walls and furniture, make things clear irrespective of what age you are or what disability you may not have. In fact, as Ed was saying, it's not an enormous number of people that are actually in wheelchairs. However, the number one disability in the UK has to do with deteriorating eyesight. So you want to build some of these things in. We recommend contrast differentials of what's called 30 light reflective value points. This is often listed right on paint charts. Or if you wanted to do something very neutral, like this chair in the middle, you would put a contrast detail on it. So again, it's very easy to pick out. There are actual light reflective value meters, which is what we use. But if you weren't using a designer, you can ask the supplier of the fabric, for example, what the light reflective value number is, and the same on the carpet in this instance. And then you could make sure that you had your 30 points between them. Here's an idea of contrast again to wall. We're using negatives. The orange against the cream against the dark floor, and you'll see all of those principles have been picked up here, as well as, and we'll get onto this in just a moment, in terms of lighting. You don't want all the light coming from the ceiling. Nobody's actual house looks like that. Hospitals look like that. And that's not a situation in which anyone actually wants to live. So where you are able to bring down even the odd wall light, this will be beneficial for people's sense of well-being, as well as bringing some table lamps in. In terms of flooring, there's obviously a lot of rolled vinyl used. You want to use slip ratings of, it's called an R rating of 10 plus or more. If you start using something like a 12, it will be difficult to clean. And if it were in, for example, a shower area, it can be very, very difficult for people underfoot. It's not particularly comfortable. So for when you're looking at shower areas, wet rooms and the like, and assisted bathrooms, for example, it's really the pendulum that you want to look at. There'll be a pendulum list, and the suppliers of the flooring will be able to advise you as to what is suitable for your specific need. Where you're using either wood floor or perhaps a laminate floor in a special area, you want the sheen level to be satin or matte. Because of macular degeneration, when light is shining on surfaces which are shiny, it will blind people temporarily, and that is not a safe situation, nor is it pleasant to live in. So again, this is the example of what I was talking about before, where you can see here there's a mixture of wall lights, some pendant fittings, and then the M&E consultant will put general luminaires into a space. There's a lot of argument at the moment as to what the right overall lux level is, or overall level of lighting. And you should probably take the advice of your M&E consultant. At the moment, Sterling University is suggesting something that's in excess of an operating theater, and a lot of other people are doing things that are too low. So it's about finding the right level. You'll also have a choice of sort of color temperatures of light bulbs, and you'll see in the HousingLIN document, we're recommending something around 3000 K. The M&E consultants often come in with 4000 K, and that's the sort of lighting that is actually required for an office, and it feels like an office. And again, nobody wants to live in an office. So that's something you'll want to challenge. Circadian lighting, there's a bit in here about that as well, which goes into the color temperature. And you'll see here's the 3000 that we're talking about. And you can see that it starts to get very cold and unfriendly after about a 3000 Kelvin color temperature. You want communal spaces to be very flexible. That's the key takeaway here. In terms of furniture, you want furniture that people can push down on to stand up without it tipping over, but at the same time, light enough that it can be moved. And so generally, if you're going to be ordering chairs, for example, for a specific space, we would recommend that you would get a sample and try it and try moving it and make sure it's fit for purpose before you go buying a lot of them. Various color contrasts in corridors, even if the corridors run throughout and look quite the same, can help very much with wayfinding. In terms of the floor, if you're going from, you'll see there's a muted pattern in the center and then a plane on the outside of this image. That's because that plane is then, that tone is what's carrying through into the bedroom. So there are no strong thresholds that anybody's particularly concerned about walking around. In terms of upholstered furniture, the main thing we're looking for is things with arms and different seat heights. The guidelines for seat heights and the seat rake and everything is in this document, but remember that not everyone living in your facility will be the same height. And so you do need some variation. I'm going to just flip through the other thing. This mainly deals with the fact of using matte again. Fabrics, you want high rub tests. They need to meet commercial standards. There's some things about acoustics here. If you have a lot of glass and a vinyl floor, you will want some sort of acoustic intervention in your property. In this case, those slats are actually foam, but you can't tell at a distance, and it provides an acoustic break into what is a lively space acoustically in a dining facility. Being able to display things is quite nice. There's a lot of detail about setting out artwork, etc. Kitchens, this is exactly what Ed was talking about, drop downs, manual dexterity, and also thermostatic stops on the water supply, for example, so that people are not getting scalded. And again, you'll see there's a contrast in this Motionspot design between the units, the backsplash, the counter, and the floor, but you'll see that the color is continuing from the carpet into the floor that they've recommended in this instance. So this is a really good example of being fit for purpose, and it's certainly a kitchen any of us, I think, would be happy to have in our own homes. Some of those details that Ed was talking about are also shown in the document. In terms of bedrooms, again, it's about contrast and looking homely. Outdoor spaces can be very important. The image on the upper right-hand corner is actually in a tower block with no outside space, but we've created a sense of a garden space within that. Hanging artwork. In your own home, do you get to change and move things around? You might want to do that for people in a facility that you're providing as well. Environmental impact is in here, as well as a little bit about technology that I think Ed has already talked about. That's me.
Great. Thanks, Laurie, for that. And can I say what a brilliant document to be able to release to the industry. You know, these are simple principles that for so long have been missed and ignored, and to have them all together in one single document and released for free as part of the network of HousingLIN is fantastic to see. I think, like all these guidance documents, it's only as good as the person reading it and interpreting it, and that's where kind of conversation and engaging specialists is absolutely vital. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing that document released and also seeing the impact that it will have on designing more beautiful interiors and have them as accessible and inclusive
and homely. I think the people want, and that's the opening to that document, is people want to live in a home. If it's a home that they're moving from one home, the place that they're moving to is also their home, and it's about how we can create that in a safe and accessible way.
Absolutely, fully agree with that. I've got a few questions that are, I'd love to get into the detail around lighting levels and your comment in particular around operating theatre versus moody, and we come across that a lot. But before we get into that detail, I'm really keen to understand from you. You obviously run a lot of focus groups as part of your work. What are the sort of most common challenges that you see within homes for older people? We've mentioned some of them already, but if you were to sort of summarize the most challenging common issues, what would they be? I
think you can't appeal. I think there are two answers to that. One is client facing and one is supply side facing. So from a client standpoint, you are not going to appeal to everybody. If you go back to the homes people were moving from and open the doors, they're not going to look alike. So to come up with front of house shared spaces that people will feel comfortable with is a challenge for anybody, even professional designers. The approach that we take is that if you're in a building, and let's say you might not even be going out a lot of times out of this building, but you may be, you're not going to be in the same mood every day. In your own home, every room does not look alike. And so while you do want some themes carrying through, certainly in terms of those flooring surfaces and tones from a safety standpoint, you want to create different moods in different spaces. And I think that is critical to getting this non-clinical look, but also then you have a greater chance of somebody finding a space that they personally identify with. I think there's a lot in that. The second thing is a supply chain issue, and the biggest challenge, and the challenge has been the same forever, and that is carpeting companies that are selling, for example, commercial impervious back carpets, and vinyl suppliers, and they don't talk to each other. And we really do need to come up with similar tones going through these spaces for a sense of security, and particularly if there's any sense of dementia. You'll get somebody standing on the edge of a light colored flooring looking onto a dark colored flooring, and they will see, their brain may or may not see that as an abyss. They're not going to feel safe. This is their home. They need to feel safe. So that range is too limited because the one side doesn't speak to the other. I've been working on this for years. I'm going to get there at some point, but we're not quite there yet. Yeah. It's
certainly something we see on our side, particularly around that conversation with manufacturers. Yeah. Manufacturers are still are still predominantly designing product for a different market to the one we're talking about today. They are designing products that are mostly designed by younger people. And even if they have got a range for later living, it tends to be younger people who are shaping that design, assuming what they might need in later years. And that for us, we keep going back to this concept of evidence-based design and having people feed back into the design process. We've had some real success at Motionspot over the last 10 years working with manufacturers, particularly in bathroom fittings, getting them to think about who they're designing for and what changes they can make to products like basin mixers and shower valves. I'm sure your basin mixer and shower valve is similar to mine at home. It is a chrome. You might have a different finish, Laurie, but I've got a chrome valve at home with very poor markings for hot and cold. Absolutely. Very poor markings for an overhead versus a handheld. For us, the products that form part of that Motionspot bathroom range, it is all about intuitive, easy to use, easy to understand products. So I certainly hear you on that front. I'd love to.
It also goes on to things like, where digital displays are in bathrooms as well, to make sure you've got colour contrast. And I know that links into some of the tech points that both of you raised as well. Sorry to interject, but I just thought
no. We'll
continuation.
We can certainly uncover that technology point. Just before we do, that point about choice you made, Laurie, really struck with me. And for us, it is all about providing choice for people. And it's back to your point on, what should the lux levels be? Should they be as bright as an operating theatre, or should they be as moody as a boutique 5-star hotel that wants that full sort of immersive hospitality experience? The answer is neither. I wouldn't want to live in either of those environments for a period of time, unless I was performing a task that I really needed my vision around. So if I'm chopping in the kitchen and I'm struggling with low vision, I want the right sort of lighting around those task areas. If I'm shaving in the bathroom, I want the same sort of light source over the basin. But for us, the choice in lighting comes in if it can be adjusted to suit your mood and the time of day. And when I read your document, the whole Circadian Rhythms piece came in, and it'd be good to just explain that principle to people on this session, if you could.
Yes, so circadian, we have sort of, our brain has lots of different components, but not components, it's all the same stuff, but different areas that function in different ways. And the sort of most primeval part of our brain actually is hardwired into us as human beings. And it's why the first time you start doing an overnight shift someplace, you really are struggling, because our bodies are set on a certain rhythm to follow natural daylight. And natural daylight has different colors. So first thing in the morning, it's very, very blue. It gets warmer as the day goes on. It gets warmer still as the day progresses into twilight, when it starts to break off. And so particularly if you have people with dementia, but even if you don't, there's a natural sense of well-being if you're in a space that matches what your body's expectations are. And there's loads and loads of research available on this. You only need to Google circadian lighting and it will all come up. It's been very, very well documented. Certainly we put it in very, very often in dementia areas. However, you also, if you don't have that kind of spend, you can get individual circadian lamps. So you could have just a standing lamp in or a table lamp, excuse me, in a lounge, for example, that's going to give that ambiance to people that are living in that space. I think the answer in terms of light levels is when you're in your 70s and when you're in your, say, 20s, there are lots of differences in your body. One of them is that the back of your eye when you're in your 70s will receive only 20% of the light that it did when you were in your 20s. Therefore, your overall light levels do need to be higher for people that are aging. However, they really do not need to be that of an operating theater, in my opinion. There are things in the middle, sort of what we often refer to as lux levels, say in the vicinity of around 350, we're having very good experience with, just by way of example. And what you were talking about, task lighting, I mean, in kitchens, this is very easy because you've got, to a certain extent, you've got your over-counter lights. But Ed, how do you handle task lighting in bathrooms?
For us, task lighting can be delivered through clever LED strips on mirrors, for example, in front of the basin, making sure that those mirrors are lit all the way around rather than lit at the top. Because if the light is at the top and you're bending forward on the basin, you cast a shadow naturally into that basin bowl. And for someone with low vision or dementia, they could see moving images in that bowl. So thinking about sort of task lighting around that that mirror is particularly important. We often get involved in helping clients understand exactly where they need to put the spotlights over the key areas within the bathroom. So making sure it's over the toilet and in the shower area and over the basin. But also we're big fans of lighting things at the right time. So as we get older, we will inevitably visit the toilet more times at night. And if we're getting up at night, we don't want the lights to come on bright and fire up all the chemicals in our brain to be awake. So what low-level lighting can help us navigate safely to the toilet and then back to the bed and then switch off as part of the timer. So those are the sort of principles within bathroom lighting design.
I always find we have a bit of a struggle sometimes with the low-level lighting in that it's always blue. Now, there are a couple reasons for that we don't even necessarily need to get into in this session, but blue is, of course, the daylight light. However, it is easier to see. And so I don't know, how do you, I mean, the way we manage it is by making sure it's the reddest blue light that we can find. But I don't know if you have any other tricks to share on that.
Our interpretation is very much for an orange, an orangey glow would be the sort of level that you want to trigger navigation, but not necessarily stimulate the mind. It's one of those that, again, it's back to those conversations with manufacturers to say what are the color options that we can have on these lights, and interior designers and also access and inclusive designers kind of advising on what that level of light should be to safely navigate people to the bathroom. Laurie, we've got a few questions coming in the chat. I just wanted to out not a question but a comment from Julia Ashley. Thanks, this is really helpful for the sector, will help to move the agenda on. I have to mention Julia because Julia has been pioneering what we've been talking about at the London Housing Association, CNC, for so many years. She's presented many times at the Housing LIN. I was lucky enough on Thursday of last week to visit a new development of Julia's called Grace House in St John's Wood with the Minister of Disabled People, Chloe Smith. And we were blown away by what we saw there. Julia is embedded accessible and inclusive design from the outset of the project, has done it on housing association budgets, which is really important for the industry to understand. This is not a five-star hotel. This is 190 units. Julia will correct me for the number of social rent housing. And so many of the principles we've been discussing today can be seen there. We are going to be, so Joe, as part of our comms team, is going to be writing up what we've seen at Grace House and be really keen to release that, Jeremy, as part of the Housing LIN network.
That'd be great, Ed. In fact, we covered the very early days of the process that Julia was working on when it was called Dora House as a HousingLIN Inspirational Achievement. So I would be really great to see, you know, a year and a half, well, post 2 years on, the developments there. That'd be great.
Yeah. Laurie, question for you from Roger Hazelden. How can we make accessible inclusive design and products, and I'm happy to come in on this as well, more affordable so that more people can benefit, especially if finances are a challenge, i.e. local authority funded projects?
I would say finishes, and I mean, that would be that's my starting place on that, because we work in all different, I mean, the most recent assisted supported housing scheme we did was literally located in the middle of a roundabout in London, out near Wembley. And this was a very, very low budget, and we were able to adapt things by going to suppliers and saying, you know, there's a point before you put this really expensive finish over the top. Could you do it with a powder coated fit for purpose thing, which is also going to give us the contrast levels that we wanted? So you can kind of, I don't know, what's your...
I'd fully support that. There are low, no cost changes that can be made to the interior spec that will make a significant difference. We've been able to make some big cost savings for local authorities and housing associations around the removable grab rails I was talking about. So rather than installing a jungle gym of rails and seats in every single bathroom that not all residents are going to use, they're certainly not going to use all of those rails. How can you flexibly and adaptably put the fixings in so that you can fit rails as and when people need it? So there are ways of doing this on really limited budget. I really want to give that message that this isn't just about, having a 5-star hotel Brooklyn budget. And actually that's connected to a couple of points on here. So there was a comment from Ploy from Aging Better. Hi Ploy, nice to hear from you. It'd be great to understand your thoughts on the landscape for inclusive design at the moment. Do you feel like hotels and public spaces are becoming more aware of inclusive design? Is this something widely requested, or is it something you suggest to clients? So we find that the more progressive hotels, and actually we're doing an awful lot of space in commercial offices at the moment, are realizing that inclusive design is just part of the design process. It should be
design.
It's what we should be doing. Now, the nice thing is that success of those projects is being able to, the learnings from those projects are being able to be brought across to the sector we're talking about today. But there are people like Julia and CNC that are already on this path. I think as an industry, I don't know if you agree, Laurie, we need to be speeding up this thought process. It's still considered too late in the design process, and that's back to the title of this presentation.
I think I could not agree with you more, actually. It's absolutely critical. And relating that back to the previous question, at the beginning of any project, when people are looking at budget allocations, being able to say, we can handle some of that by a color of paint. This isn't going to up the budget, but you can still get something that looks remarkably fresh and enlivening in a space just by using a particular paint, just by changing paint colors in certain areas and making sure that you have those contrasts. And color coding, if you're doing buildings with lifts, why not have as a suggestion, you can do it through artwork, you can do it by spending lots of money on signs, but you can also do it by every time the lift door opens, there's a completely different color on the wall opposite you, which is cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, Ploy also says, additionally, do you feel many organisations, as in suppliers, are aware of the properties that are needed to make their products inclusive, or is there a knowledge expertise gap? I think we've sort of referenced that already. I feel there is, and we feel there is a knowledge gap in this space. Ploy, I think it'd be really good to release Ploy and Aging Better released a video last year that I supported as part of my government ambassador role around just encouraging organisations to design more inclusive products. And it'd be good to sort of share that link, which is relevant for this conversation. There's a comment here, and actually it's connected. So Ange Adams asks, I work with young adults with complex learning disabilities and or autism. Are there any similar guides to the one you've released today, Laurie, available for this group of people that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So we posted something in the chat box which lists a range of good practice tools we're aware of. We create a specific page on design and technology for people with learning disability or autism. So there are some examples, but they're not uniform or standardized. They're pepper potted around. So it's a really good point that's made. But do browse that.
What I would add to that is there is a British Standard PAS coming out in the autumn of this year called Design for the Mind, specifically on design principles for neurodiversity. And Jason Slocum, who is our, you know well, Laurie, he
was at my wedding
as our neurodiversity expert. He's helped shape that PAS. Again, that's free to access. So keep an eye on the British standards for guidance on designing for neurodiversity, which will be out later in the autumn. And that's sort of connected to a question that Liz Alvey asks around how can we ensure that inclusive design is not seen only as so-called, as part of so-called specialist buildings, but integrated into all buildings, so they're truly inclusive. I think you've summarised exactly why we wanted to run this session, Liz, and why Laurie and I do lots of kind of different speaking on this area. I would say that in order to truly generate change at scale, we need government regulations to move this on and to put pressure on developers to be incorporating the principles Laurie and I've been talking about today and the products at the early stage of that design and build process. And it is our responsibility as an industry, where there is a shortage of that regulation, to just do it anyway, because it's the right thing to do, and regulations don't design homes that are good enough to suit us as we get older. And we can then take the learnings back across the industry. And Jeremy, I know your connections with the HousingLIN into DLUC and other government departments to help lobby and look at changing these regulations will really help the industry.
And
sorry, go on, Laurie.
I was just going to say, I think that relates back to Becky's question that she sent about how do you design for older people when they don't want to be considered older. It's the same answer. It's inclusive. If you design something that is inclusive, it's going to suit older people. It's going to basically suit everybody, because as the slide Ed showed at the beginning, you don't know that you're not going to temporarily lose your eyesight at one point. I did at one point in my life. You don't know what your challenges might be going forward. So I think it's really good design, and I think if the principles are implemented, it should suit lots of people.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, in terms of the sort of standards and regulation point, Ed, we're actually on a working group linked to Scotland on their attempts to sort of roll out the inclusive living toolkit. And looking at, from England, Scotland and Wales, different aspects around how to improve regulation standards. And we hope also to create a UK-wide alliance of organisations working on inclusive design. So again, watch this space.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. I'm just conscious of time. We've hit 5 o'clock, and I want to begin to start drawing things to a close. Just before I do, Laurie, interested on your take on the whole kind of digital side of inclusive design and also interior design. What sort of trends you're seeing as an interior designer in this space from a digital perspective?
From a digital perspective, we are seeing a lot of things coming in terms of fall prevention, what I like to call soft monitoring, where nobody's actually being watched, but where you can tell that people are safe, the sort of thing you were talking about earlier. I think the challenge within that space and what we're looking for, and actually at the CARE show in up in Birmingham coming up this October, there's going to be a whole panel discussion on this, is about how you integrate these things. Because what you can't have, and you mentioned it earlier as well, Ed, you can't have a place where you have 6 or 7 monitors that are monitoring different things and expect it to look like anybody's home, but also expect anybody to be aware of what's happening, because they're not actually interacting with people, they're interacting only with screens. So I think that's the next part of it. But a lot of the controls and the safety things seem to be there in place. Is that what you're finding as well?
Yeah, there's been a massive investment in smart technology for falls prevention as much as anything, and there's still got to be a lot of development to come as we move from analog systems into digital, and an understanding that it's not just about preventing the fall, it's about, as I was saying earlier, what is happening in the lead up to that fall, and how can technology detect actually when a fall is more likely to happen, so we can intervene with people interaction at the right stages. We're, from our side, we're seeing quite a lot of development of digital shower technology at the moment, particularly in bathrooms. Really good for anyone with access needs, being able to turn the shower on, get it to the right temperature before moving into the shower. How often have we all been in a hotel bathroom, turned the shower on and had the jet of cold water hitting us? We're seeing much more sort of wash and dry toilets come to the market, and I'm sure lots of attendees on this call will have wash and dry toilets retrofitted into their apartments and properties. What we would always say is think about how you can future-proof your properties for a wash and dry toilet. So how can you plan the power provision close to the toilet, so actually the retrofit is only a connection into that power, and that could be a socket on the other bedroom wall side, it could be a fused spur that just sits somewhere in the bathroom that you can connect to. So we see technology really transforming this space. It can't take away personal care, but it's a really exciting future, I think.
Ed, what you guys have, Motionspot's having its 10th anniversary. So in addition to technology, what have you also seen as the big changes in the past decade?
I think the three big changes from our side that we've seen is people are more willing to speak about this than they were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when James and I set up, it was all, oh, well, this is a nice to have. We're designing accessible apartments anyway because we're following regulation, was often the response we got. But as more and more projects have been built, and unfortunately more and more problems have occurred in homes of older people that just haven't been planned right from the outset, there has been more of a realization that we need to do something different. There is a growing awareness that we need to design for everybody, not just for wheelchair users. So I'd say we're 20% of the way there is in terms of knowledge base across the industry. We've got quite a long way to go. What I've been really pleased to see, and this is connected into the work you do and we do, is much more focused around aesthetics, and it goes back to your point of let's create homes we want to live in rather than spaces that we have to occupy, and a much greater focus on aesthetics is a change I've seen. And the last one is cost. Costs are coming down in this space. The more projects that can be built like Grace House with CNC, the better, because it gets the volume up. It gets the volume up, it gets the production price down, the manufacturing price down, and it enables us to be able to transform procurement frameworks for local authorities, and really that's what we want to try and achieve at scale, is how do we get local authorities thinking differently about their specification and procurement process, and the sooner we can do that, the better, really. So those would be my main things. And for you, if you were to pick out a couple of areas that you've seen in the time at Park Grove.
I think the understanding from people that are building of the importance of this element. I think that's the biggest change, is they've opened their minds to the fact that there's extra value here, even if there is an extra cost. I mean, and everybody knows that nobody wants to move into something that looks institutional. Nobody does. No one aspires to that. So if you want a facility, and let's not forget about people working in places as well, staffing is incredibly difficult. Retention is incredibly difficult. If you're creating an atmosphere, you know how you feel when you go into some place with a nice atmosphere and when you go into a place that doesn't have a nice atmosphere. It's night and day.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, totally agree. Laurie, thanks for joining me as part of this session. Been a really enjoyable hour and a bit conversation. Jeremy, handing back to you.
Ed, thank you very much, and equally, Laurie, what a fantastic presentation. I think the fact that we've had so many great questions in the Q&A box, as well as the chat generally, just demonstrates how this is hit a real important area and often underexplored, both within the LIN, but I think in the sector. And I think it'd be great if we can keep this conversation going. I know, for one, that we haven't touched on things like post-occupancy evaluations, and both of you have got real interesting insights within that. But on behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank both of you for supporting us, as well as for sharing both your experience, your expertise, and obviously, Laurie, for crafting a really brilliant new fact sheet for the HousingLIN, which we've launched today and is now available on the HousingLIN website. As I mentioned at the outset, this is the last in our present series. We really look forward to inviting you back to our autumn and winter series in the middle of September, late September onwards. We're just currently sort of crafting a program around that. As Sally mentioned at the outset, the slides and the recordings from today's session will be available hopefully tomorrow, and you can also pick it up in our weekly bulletin this Friday. Links. This will be our last bulletin for this period, and we're again having a short summer break over August. It just leaves me to say thanks to Motionspot, to Park Grove. Can I also just say some words and thanks to UKRI Healthy Aging Challenge, who support the HousingLIN's Happy Hour. They've also invested heavily in research around healthy aging, and we look forward to drawing out some of their work later this year. Can I also thank the team behind the HousingLIN scenes for putting this on and making it run so smoothly. So thanks, Sally and Jerome, and everybody who joined us this afternoon. I wish you a really good summer. Take care, stay well, be safe, and join us again in September. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jeremy.